Welcome back to The Rancher's Voice, the podcast where the heart of agriculture meets the pulse of today's industry. From policy changes to leadership stories in the Western lifestyle, The Rancher's Voice dives into the stories that matter most to ag producers. Hi guys, it's Ellie. I just wanted to provide you guys with a little bit of an update. So this episode was recorded prior to the Senate voting on the big beautiful bill. So there may be some changes in the final product versus what we discussed on this episode. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Rancher's Voice. I'm your host, Ellie Brighton, and of course, our co-host, Raylee Honeycutt.
Hello, everyone.
With us today, we have Kent Bacus. Kent is the Executive Director for Government Affairs at National Cattlemen's Beef Association, NCBA, in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Kent. Thank you for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing just fine. This is a very busy time here in D.C., and it's it's incredibly hot and humid, so people are less likely to be outside enjoying the weather, and they're going to be behind their desk and hopefully working on getting some of these important bills over the line before the July 4th recess.
I hope they're working too. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your role at NCBA and what that looks like?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Texas, grew up there, and then moved to D.C. Out of college and ended up working on Capitol Hill for a few years, worked for Senator Elizabeth Dole from North Carolina, and worked on a lot of agricultural issues and appropriations issues, and got to know NCBA through some of the bigger issues at that time that would have been around a farm bill and some other fun issues like that were popping up. Got a chance to know Colin Woodall, our current CEO. He was a lobbyist at that time, and so ended up had an opportunity to come work for NCBA, and I've been with NCBA for about 15 years now, which is surprising. In DC, you're surprised to see people last more than 18 to 24 months in some place, but there's just something about the cattle sector, something about NCBA. Just keeps pulling me back. This is a great place to work, great industry. We've got great affiliates all across the country, and we've got great issues that we get to fight for. So this is one of those jobs that it's not really a burden. It's a challenge, but you look forward to it every day, and I'm very fortunate to get to continue to work for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association here in Washington.
We would definitely agree. You are a definite valuable resource for our members and for us as an affiliate back there in DC. Now, you mentioned DC was hot and humid right now, lots going on, people working. We're looking and going up to a July 4th vote, but we still have a lot of changes happening with the administration turnover, still waiting on a lot of appointments, things like that. So as we kind of kick it off, can you give our listeners a little bit of background or kind of where the state of play is in Washington, D.C. under the Trump administration? What's moved quickly, what's maybe not moved so quickly, and where things are at?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the situation right now is this is a second term administration, but it's not a consecutive term. So typically there's some grace period that's involved. Even on a second term, there's usually a little bit of time, kind of a honeymoon period to get up and going on certain things. But this is an administration that definitely recognizes that time is not a luxury that it can afford. And so on day one, actually even before he was sworn in, President Trump was already taking positions of what he wanted to accomplish, who he was going to bring in. And so there wasn't this grand reveal. It was a lot of that groundwork was laid ahead of time. And on day one, he rolled back 75 of the Biden administration's executive orders, issued a lot of new executive orders, not just rolling those back, but also advancing new policies. So the America First trade policy being one of those, but also addressing a lot of things with border security and just a lot of other things to just get people moving. If you look over the last 4 years, the Biden administration really kind of dragged its feet on some key areas that were important for our industry and tried to advance more regulatory burdens. And so having someone come in that can roll a lot of that back and kind of take that pressure off of cattle producers, off of small business owners, is definitely a breath of fresh air. But also having an administration that is going to engage on international trade policy, and in the background of all that, what would usually take all of the oxygen out of the room is an expiring tax code. And many of these are tax policies that President Trump, really pushed in 2017. So they're referred to as the Trump tax cuts. A lot of those are set to expire, and so this is not an administration that's had a lot of time to kind of wait and see. This is an administration that's going to move. It's going to move quickly, and really try to advance as many of these policies, while they can. There hasn't been a lot of, I would say, effective opposition to that, to the advancement of that, because you have a House and a Senate that are controlled by Republicans, and even with slim majorities, they're still majorities, and so that really empowers the executive branch to advance a lot of these things, and with broad support. So we've seen, I would say, probably a much faster pace and an advancement of some of these key regulatory issues and key policies. Um, but with that said, this is still an environment where people have their personal requests or personal issues that they want to try to advance, or they're looking for opportunities to emerge and to differentiate themselves. Within the Republican Party, you have members of the Freedom Caucus, and you have members that are probably more of your moderates. And each one of those, they're really kind of in that position to influence decisions one way or another. In the House of Representatives, we saw the One Big Beautiful Bill pass by one vote, and you still have a lot of divisive positions on certain tax provisions, but also just the difference in what do we need to keep, and then how are we going to pay for that. The big focus on the budget, on deficits, that is really a major focus in the House. We're starting to see a lot of that in the Senate too. And so even though you have Republicans controlling all three houses, you still have these differing views, and you still have some semblance of gridlock. So how do you overcome that in these institutions? And a lot of that depends on how much the public engages, how they respond. This is a White House. This is a president that likes the media attention, that likes to talk about what he's doing, what he's accomplishing, and he's also not afraid to use that as a bully pulpit for different members of Congress who are either trying to stand up or stand out in some of these things, and really kind of be the wrench in the system. So this is an exciting time for policy nerds like me, because this is not a traditional time. This is really new ground in many ways. We're seeing policies move at speeds much faster than we're accustomed to, and we're also seeing the debates shift based on each issue set. And so sometimes you'll have, some of the members on the right wing of the party, or the right wing of the spectrum, the left wing of the spectrum, and they kind of swing back towards the middle in a circle, and you have strange bedfellows on some key issues. But that's just a really high level overview of what's happening here in DC. But all of that is in response to what people have been telling President Trump that they want to see over the last 4 years, and you're really seeing that emerge. But again, we're working under a really tight timeline, because midterm elections start in just over a year, if not before that, and that means that it's going to be really hard for Congress to get anything done. And so, we'll see how successful the president and Congress are in getting a lot of these big ticket items done this year. But that really is the focus. And so, with that said, nights and weekends are not a concept that this president abides by. And so, members of the Republican Party in the House and the Senate also keep the same hours.
Well, it out here, I mean, in the States, I would say that is the sense, just as far as how much that they're trying to get done right now, and how many things are flowing through. Like, love the administration or hate the administration, you can't really deny that they are just pushing things through like crazy. So I'm sure you guys have your work cut out for you.
Yeah, there's never a dull moment, and in Washington. Sometimes are slower than others, but that it wasn't long ago where I'd been praying for about 3 months. God, just give me a boring week. I just need one to kind of catch up on things, and he gave me 3 days. But you take those blessings when you can. But anybody that's expecting this to be a slow August, because we usually have an August recess, then they haven't worked with this administration and they don't know this president.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned early on that kind of tariffs were a big part of the initial orders rolling out. Um, so far, cattle and beef have been kind of unscathed from that. But can you give our listeners kind of an update on where tariffs are at, what we can expect to see moving forward, or will things settle out a bit more?
Yeah, and just bear with me because I'm going to try to run through this as in a comprehensive way without getting too far into the weeds. But if you look at the America First trade policy, that really is the playbook or the blueprint of how President Trump was going to engage on this. The first item of business was to address the fentanyl crisis, to address border security concerns. His view on trade overall is let's go after trade deficits and let's use tariffs as the tool to affect that change. But tariffs are not limited just to trade imbalances. He's also using tariffs as leverage for getting other countries to work with the U.S. to address the fentanyl crisis, to address human trafficking and the border security issues that we've had with Canada and Mexico and other countries that have played a role in some of that. And so that was the first thing we saw. And that's where the 25% tariffs were announced on Canada and Mexico, 20% tariffs on China. Obviously, that was a big shock to the system. We saw the market respond to that. For us in the cattle sector and the beef sector, this is always something that we watch very closely because we trade a lot of beef and cattle across the border with both Canada and Mexico. So any disruption to that supply chain could be detrimental in the long run. So keeping our our industry out of the crossfire was pretty important. But you also have steel and aluminum tariffs. You have auto tariffs. You have a lot of these other things to address those big trade distortions and some of the more I would say issues with national security significance, and that's really where he's trying to focus. So you have those, and then on top of that, you kind of have the catch-all, which was the reciprocal tariffs. And if you look at April 2nd, that was Liberation Day. That's when the president stood in the Rose Garden, had a big list of countries and said, here are all the problems we have. And this is what we are assessing as basically what we believe is fair. And actually, we're being generous on this. So what they did was they calculated all of the tariffs that we face in other countries, all of the non-tariff barriers we face in other countries. So places that don't take that put other restrictions on our beef, other things like that. They took all that into consideration. And they said, okay, we estimate that if you were to put a number on this, it would be this value or it'd be this percentage of a tariff. And then they cut that in half. And that's what the president announced were those reciprocal tariffs. So obviously the market responded to that too. And the president stood up and said, okay, look, we are going to move forward with these, but we're going to put a 90-day pause on this. And that helped the market kind of recover a little bit. But it also sent a pretty strong message to a lot of our trade partners. And it sent the message that the days of the United States coming to you on basically on peaceful terms, on extending the carrot, the olive branch and saying, hey, where can we work together on this? We're beyond that now. We've tried that. It wasn't successful. So now if this continues, here are all the tariffs that you will face. And that sent a pretty strong message, and it incentivized a lot of countries to come to the table. And like or dislike that approach, it's been very effective because it's brought over 30 countries to the table with offers to the U.S. saying, hey, we don't want to get hit with these tariffs, so we're willing to do these things. We know that you've pointed these other things out. These are ongoing issues. Here's what we're willing to do. Just don't hit us with these tariffs. That leverage has definitely created a lot of momentum. And one message we've really tried to push with the administration is let's focus on improving trade with our allies. Let's shore up that first. Let's countries where we're not potentially, at war or in a cold war, but countries where we are allied and we have the same security interest. Let's look at those as opportunities to expand our presence in their market and have more of that supply chain sustainability. Because when you have those stable supply chains, producers are more profitable. It's less hiccups in the market and more, I would say, steadiness and access to consumers. So that's why we're seeing trade deals with the United Kingdom, with Japan, with Korea, other things like that are starting to emerge. And that's very promising. But even with Canada, who's fired back on a lot of these other tariff announcements that have come forward, even the Canadians have said, "Look, uh, we want to build this relationship." They've kind of moved past the political rhetoric and said, "Look, the United States is very important to us. Let's come together and find a way to work together." So this aggressive nature has caused some market instability in the broader market. But for us in the cattle and beef sector, we've really kind of come out of it unscathed on a lot of things. Now there have been some issues that have emerged that still need to be addressed. If you look at China is a roughly $2 billion market for us. And even before all of the escalation with the tariffs, China was failing to abide by the phase one agreement that President Trump had negotiated a few years ago. They started delisting plants because they were detecting the presence of ractopamine and other things like that. They allowed the export certificates for 394 plants to expire, basically cut us out of that market. And then this just about a week ago, China also announced they were delisting 3 other plants for traces of hormones. Well, in the agreement that China made with the United States, none of those were supposed to be issues. So now the president's having to go back and really try to negotiate with them and to hold them accountable for it. And that, so we're not completely unscathed, but in the grand scheme of things, we've really been in a good spot. And a lot of that has to do because all we have asked of this administration and all we've asked for our trade partners is let's have fair trade, let's have science-based trade, let's address these bigger issues, and let's really try to have more predictability and just have better trade partners. We still have a long way to go with Australia. We still have a long way to go with Brazil, with a lot of other places. But by and large, we're starting off in a very positive direction. And this is a president who's willing to engage and willing to fight for U.S. agriculture. And that's been a real breath of fresh air.
Absolutely. On those countries that still kind of need to be negotiated or terms need to be negotiated, is there a timeline? Obviously, the 90-day pause happened, but is there set forth timelines that these countries need to come to the table or there'll be additional repercussions?
I think the president is pretty clear in the fact with his message that if countries are not willing to negotiate with us, then we're going to proceed with these reciprocal tariffs. These reciprocal tariffs, if you look at it, this is not us hitting another country with something they don't deserve. This is really looking at fair trade and what that equates to. What numeric value can you set at that? But even that, there are still some big outstanding issues we need to address. If you look at the Australians, we've had a trade agreement with them for 20 years. A trade agreement where they were supposed to allow U.S. beef, yet we have not sold $1 of fresh beef into that market in 20 years. They've used every excuse under the sun to keep us out, all in the name of biosecurity or other things, even though we've been very transparent with everything we do, and we have the highest standards recognized in the world. The Australians, on the other hand, have exported about $29 billion worth of beef to the U.S. market. Now, you're looking at trade deficits. That is one that we called out. NCBA called that out specifically. President Trump talked about that in the Rose Garden, even though that wasn't part of his prepared remarks, because he understands the significance of what that means for our cattle producers. When you look at Brazil, there's a lot of outstanding issues there. Obviously, we do not want the Brazilians in this market until they can, really prove that they meet our safety standards. We have a lot of concerns on that. But at the same time, Brazil has shipped about $4.5 billion worth of beef here in the last 5 years. We've only sold about $21 million worth into their market because every time that the cattle sector steps up and says something and calls the Brazilians to the carpet, and we ask for Secretary Vilsack and the Biden administration to hold them accountable, the Brazilians tacked on another trade barrier to U.S. beef. So these are the kind of trade partners that we really need to hold accountable. We have a president that's willing to do it. And, this is something that NCBAs can continue to push.
So you touched on it in your previous answer, but we talked a little bit about the US UK economic prosperity deal and the related executive order that tied beef to that. So could you tell us a little bit more about that deal specifically and what that's going to look like for producers?
So we were very excited to see U.S. beef included in this initial offering. If you look at it from the UK standpoint, they've been hesitant to talk about agriculture as much. That's a very sensitive market for them. And if you look at some of the agreements they've signed with the Australians and New Zealand, their producers weren't very happy with that. So they're very hesitant when you look at a market the size of the U.S. And they're pretty, I would say they're pretty concerned about our ability to go in and displace all of their domestic product. That's not really what we're looking to do. We see the UK as a good place for some specific cuts where we could have some value add, but also this is about establishing really good trade with a country that we've had a special relationship for a very long time. But when you look at that the initial offering, the initial deal that has been discussed, we would receive 13,000 metric tons annually into their market duty free. Right now, we're restricted to about 1,000 metric tons. There's also a 20% tariff. So really, this opens up a market that we've been greatly limited in. Right now, we can only sell a handful of steaks in some high value restaurants in London. So we really don't have a lot of exposure in that market. But we think that as we're able to build trust with British consumers and identify more of those, I would say, underserved areas of the market, we'll be able to compete there. At the same time, the British will receive a 13,000 metric ton quota into the U.S. market. Now, this is a carve out of a pre-existing 65,000 metric ton annual quota. That is the other country quota. So that's kind of like the miscellaneous title for countries that gain access to the U.S. but don't have a trade agreement. And included in that broader 65,000 metric tons is Brazil. Brazil eats up that quota. This year, they filled it by January 17th. That is an annual quota that begins on January 1st. And the Brazilians sent that much beef in and basically just pushed everybody else out. So a carve out from that 65,000 metric tons would allow the British a country-specific quota within that. So I think we'll probably see that continue with some other countries. Ideally, we don't have the Brazilians here. It'd be much better, but until that's addressed, then we do need to find some other ways to build stronger ties with some of these countries where we don't have those big security concerns.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about tariffs and things like that, but there's a lot of other things at play as it relates to kind of international trade as well. One thing we wanted to hit on and we've been talking about with our listeners is New World screwworm and that southern border being closed right now and currently how that may affect trade as well. So do you want to hit on that a little bit and share with us what you guys anticipate that southern border trade component looking like as it relates to New World screwworm?
Yeah,
Tongue twister.
We'll just call it NWS because I get tongue tied on that one. So yeah, that nasty little pest has been moving up from South America for the past few years. This is something that NCBA has been calling on USDA to prepare for, to address, and to really step up those efforts to try to keep it out. We've been doing that for the last few years. However, when this finally got to Mexico, they ended up having to close the border as a response. Now, to USDA's credit, to APHIS's credit, they were very, very fast and diligent in putting together a protocol that's kind of a two-pronged approach. One, to address cattle that would be able to come into the U.S. that would meet all the quarantine and all the health certifications and not pose a great risk to our herd. And then the second part of that was deploying those sterile flies into key areas. That's how this was rolled out. And in just in the first few weeks where it was going, it seemed to be operating okay. But we did run into some issues with deploying those flies. That is something that USDA really had to address. We had to really push the Mexican government to engage on that. to kind of clear all the bureaucratic red tape and get down to brass tacks and get these flies deployed in the places where we needed to. We're finally at that place now that they're being deployed in the right place. The other part of that too is, we're still very concerned about it because the northernmost cases, the incidents that we know about, are about 700 miles south of our border. And so the first thing we're going to need to do before that border can really be open, though, there are a couple of things that are going to need to happen. First of all, we have to have active surveillance down there. We have to know where this thing is. We have to know where it's going. Mexico had been really relying on more passive surveillance, so just on producers reporting things. And that is changing. That is something USDA is working very closely with them to address. But first of all, you got to know where it is. Then you got to know where to deploy those flies, and having all of that there and deploying it in the right areas. Those are going to be the key things. So you've got all of those things that are coming into play, and then you've also got domestic production of these sterile flies. Right now, all the flies are being produced in Panama. Then we got to transport them to Mexico and stage them and then deploy them. And so there's a lot of steps to that. Ideally, if we can have that domestic production in a very secure environment in South Texas, that makes it easier to produce them, to stage them, and deploy them. And that's really what it's going to take. Because right now there's enough flies there to kind of control, or at least to slow down the spread of these flies. But we're going to need to improve or increase significantly the volume of these flies that are needed, these sterile flies, to push this population back into South America once and for all. So this is a long-term project. This is a lot of stuff that has to happen, but the health of our herd is first and foremost. The restoration of trade is a benefit of all of these other things that will happen. And that's ultimately up to Secretary Rawlins to make that decision. Obviously, for our counterparts in Mexico, they're pretty concerned about this. Not having that access to the U.S. market, the ability to move is according to their numbers, they're estimating, industry estimates are that they have roughly 250,000 head of cattle that are backlogged. And that's very significant, because now they're having to figure out what they do with those cattle. Can they process them, and can they remain profitable by doing all of that in Mexico? At the same time, we have feed yards that have used those Mexican cattle to supplement some of the seasonal lows that we have, and so now they're having to adjust their businesses too to see how this plays. Ideally, having safe and secure trade and having that restored is a good goal to aspire to. But there's a lot of things that have to happen in the meantime. But this is a big priority for us. This is something that we will continue to push and work very closely with USDA and with our cattle sector counterparts to make sure that any trade we have is safe and secure, and ultimately that we can push this thing back and it no longer be a risk to our producers.
Well, thank you guys for working on that. I know that it's been something that a lot of our members have been talking about the last few months. I do kind of want to switch gears from administration decision making and hop over to Congress and the big beautiful bill. We know it's passed the House, it's in the Senate, it's the budget reconciliation bill. So can you kind of give us an overview on the reconciliation process, and then what you think's going to happen with the big beautiful bill?
Yeah, and without getting too
high level,
too swampy on this.
Yeah, high level.
So to bypass a lot of the Senate safeguards, things like the filibuster, the cloture, and things like that, Republicans are using the reconciliation process, which only requires a simple majority, and so that would allow Republicans in the House that have a slim majority and Republicans in the Senate that have a slim majority to secure these massive wins. And with reconciliation, that does mean that you have to go back and simply reconcile the budget and reconcile differences. So that means you have to go back and make some adjustments. You have to make some changes. The House, the rules are a little bit more lax on that. They're a little more open. In the Senate, it's very much, I would say it's much more strict. And you have what they would commonly refer to as the Byrd Bath, and that's Byrd, B-Y-R-D, a reference to former Senator Robert C. Byrd from West Virginia. But those were a set of rules. It basically says as long as things are within these rules, then you can make all of these changes. But anything that's outside of that, as determined by the Senate parliamentarian, then it's out of bounds, and that can't be included in the reconciliation bill. So the House passed their bill by one vote. That included the tax package. That was the one big beautiful bill. And when that passed, it came over to the Senate. Senate has some very different views on some key things. The House, we were very pleased with a lot of the provisions of the House tax package. When you look at the death tax, obviously we want full repeal. We're going to continue to fight for that. But until then, what the House has proposed is that we would have estate tax relief, death tax relief. The exemption levels would be increased to $15 million per individual, $30 million per couple, adjusted annually for inflation. And they also protected the step-up in basis. That's pretty big. And the other key part about that is it's not a 5-year program or 7 years. It's permanent. So that allows us a lot more predictability. So as we're doing estate planning, as we're looking at these transitions, which as our tax survey showed, there's a lot of transitions that are going to happen in the next decade. Having that stability, having that predictability helps us plan that and keep a lot of these family operations in the family. So that was one provision of the bill, but you also look at like Section 199A, qualified business deduction. That's 20% for a lot of our small businesses, especially those with pass-through incomes. The House version, they're trying to increase that to 23%. Section 179, which is important for a lot of capital investments, that gets kicked up to 2.5 million. Bonus depreciation in the House bill, that's restored to 100% for 5 years. The Senate version restores it to 100%, but makes it permanent. So you have those kind of differences that you've got to work out. So there's a couple of those things that we're looking at, but for the Senate to get this through, Senate parliamentarian has to approve a lot of the things, and they were going through the amendments and looking at what changes need to be made, what's going to be allowed. Democrats, I think, filed they have about 60 amendments they're going to move forward with. At least that was the rough estimate at the end of last week. Senate Republicans will probably have one big amendment that's usually a manager's package that comes in and makes all these other changes. All that being said, there are some tweaks that'll have to be made, and then the Senate will likely vote on it at the end of this week before the July 4th recess. The goal is to try to get this through the Senate and reconcile those differences with the House and get it passed through the House and get this to the president by July 4th. That is very ambitious. And as a recovering former Senate staffer, I can tell you the Senate does not move at light speed, and they are being asked to move at light speed right now. So there's a lot that's going to happen over this weekend. There's a lot that's going to happen probably by the time this airs. A lot of things will have changed. I was giving an update at our Idaho Cattle Association summer roundup, and as I'm giving the update, 3 things changed in my presentation. So I mean, it's just that's how fluid things are right now. But if they can get all this done, get these differences resolved, get this thing through, that's a major win for the president. But that's an even bigger win for us in the cattle sector, because these are tools that are very important to us. For the last few years, NCBA has really been working on this. We conducted a nationwide tax survey, had over 1,200 responses, a lot of them from Montana. And a lot of that information was very helpful in helping us understand how effective those 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions were, what they mean to our people, and what would happen to them if they expire. Because here's the other side of that. If the Senate fails to move forward with this, if the House can't reconcile those differences, if Congress is unable to get this to the president, at the end of this year, we're going to see the death tax revert back to that $5 million exemption level. And with land values, if land values rising like they are, all those pressures on folks, that creates a lot of instability in our industry. The fact that you could also have 199A no longer be available for a lot of our folks, that's going to be a big problem. So you've got these big tools that if Congress fails to pass this, that results in a massive tax increase on the cattle sector, on small businesses, and on families all across America. So this is a very important thing that we're working on right now. It's a very important bill. Uh, it is incredibly difficult to get this through both houses, but these are the battles we're fighting, and that's why NCBA and all of our affiliates, including Montana Stock Growers, have been fighting for this, and because we know how significant this is and what this means for all of our cattle producers.
Absolutely. And, it's something that through our producer profitability initiative has been a top priority as well. And we really appreciate the work that you and your team have done in DC to get, it even started as like just getting so many co-signers on the bills as they started rolling out. So one thing that I did want to ask you, Kent, was, I was in DC a couple weeks ago. Our delegation is fully on board, fully supportive. Um, where do you see the biggest roadblocks being as the Senate starts to vote on this and then through the Senate and House negotiations?
Well, you would think that with the Senate having a slight majority, that all Republicans would fall in line, but that doesn't seem to be the case. You do have those differences of opinion, and right now you have seven unknown senators and that kind of keeps rotating around because some of them tend to lean more in favor than others. But it really comes down to differences in a couple of key provisions. One of them being on what cuts will be made to Medicaid, and how will that affect people. You have some Senate Republicans that are worried that that is going to affect rural hospitals and how those reimbursements are made in overall medical care in rural areas. But you have senators on the other side of that too that are saying that we're not making enough cuts in Medicaid. We're not making enough of these work requirements. We're not doing a lot of these other things that we need to. SNAP was in the crosshairs on a lot of that. It seems they've been able to resolve some of those issues. And then you have the state and local tax, or SALT. And that has been a big divide between a lot of Northeast Republicans, California Republicans, and some others. In the Senate, so the House version, they had a big compromise, and that's what they were able to arrive at to get the one vote majority to get this thing through. That was part of that formula, not the only reason why, but it's a pretty important reason. In the Senate side, when the Senate's version came out, they'd reduced that from 40,000 to 10,000, and so then that created a lot of back and forth with the House that said, "What are you doing to our one big beautiful bill? Look what we did. How are we going to get this thing through if you do this?" So now it seems that there's more negotiating on that end. I think they're going to find a path forward, but this really comes down to just these small changes that are significant. I think for us, that's why we need to continue to talk about the importance of these bigger provisions, so people don't lose sight of that. So people don't lose sight of the fact that yes, you're going to debate over some smaller sections. We're talking about the death tax that's going to come back at the end of this year if we don't get this done. We're talking about 199A. That'll be a massive tax increase. That's the only thing that really gives a lot of our small businesses parities with C Corps, with larger corporations. So if you want to fight for mom and pop operations, you want to fight for Main Street, then you're going to need to have more of that certainty. You're going to need tools like 199A to make that happen. Uh, but those are the big things that we really need to reinforce is, hey, we understand these issues are getting a lot of attention, but remember what you're voting on, remember who you're fighting for, and ultimately who you represent, because that's going to make the difference at the end of the day. I think we've got a lot of really good supporters in Congress. They just have to make a few of these little tweaks. But if we can get this thing through the Senate, through the House, get this to the president, that'll be a big relief for a lot of our producers because they won't have to worry about this at the end of the year.
It'll be a relief for us knowing that got through. Um, so you mentioned kind of some other issues or things that are built into the Big Beautiful Bill and where some debates are coming from, SNAP, for example, or whatever else. So we know that there's some other ag-facing programs tied into it. So could you give us a little bit of an overview on what those look like and how they might be impacted?
Yeah, and I think with a lot of the budget cuts, the revisions that were being made to overall spending, a lot of that was really focused more on some of the row crops and some of the tools that they use. But we were able to see a lot of the things that we were concerned about with uh, you know with some of the risk mitigation tools and things like that. A lot of that was really left untouched. We're in a good spot on those. We need access to those tools, especially when you have volatility in the markets and unpredictable weather and things. You do those tools have been helpful for a lot of our members. You look at SNAP, you look at some of the work requirements and other things that were being worked around there. I think they've been able to resolve a lot of those differences. Uh, we'll see what happens, but ultimately, I think this does set up uh, Congress to be in a good place to address other farm bill related concerns. But that's what everybody's really been talking about is, hey, when are we going to do a farm bill? When are we going to do a farm bill? That's secondary to this big reconciliation package and everything that's included in that. Um, but with any bill like this, you got to keep an eye on everything. I think we think this bill, while not perfect, does address a lot of the concerns, especially when it comes to all those tax tools that are important to us, and that's why we're hopeful this will move forward very quickly.
Definitely.
And Kent, I know this isn't necessarily in your wheelhouse, but one of the things that we're seeing in Montana specifically is a lot of noise around the sale of public lands, right? That is a hot button issue out in the West, very divided and controversial. I laugh sometimes because we see these kind of pushes and outcries, and folks don't necessarily recognize that the federal government is trading or swapping or buying and selling land all the time. It's just not maybe packaged in the way that we're seeing it now. There have been some rulings as it relates to parliament or rulemaking or parliamentary procedure around the sale of public lands. So, can you share with our listeners um, what the latest update is around federal land sales as it relates to the big beautiful bill?
And I certainly don't want to don't want to cover the same ground that many people did on social media over the last week or so. But the latest on this, I'll also defer to my colleagues at the Public Lands Council who've been front and center on addressing all these concerns. I cannot speak enough about the significance of my colleagues at the Public Lands Council for really making sure all of these members of Congress understand the significance of some of these proposals. But the latest that we've heard just recently was that the Senate parliamentarian had ruled out uh, uh, some of those proposals related to disbursements of public land. So I think we're going to be in a good place on that. You know, I think moving forward, you also have to look at making sure that when people are looking at these things, they think, oh, this is a good idea, or that idea. They need to understand how this actually impacts our producers. That's really what NCBA, Public Lands Council, has been trying to do, specific to this concern and to this issue. But when you look at the much bigger overall reconciliation bill, we've really been able to kind of stay out of the crosshairs on a lot of these other issues. There are a lot of other policies that were being pushed in the House side, not related to our industry, but certainly stuff that would affect small businesses. And we were glad to see that uh, we've got good people that are working on these bills. We've got good allies in Congress that make sure that anytime these ideas come up, that they are vetted and that they have a real understanding of how this affects our people out in the countryside.
And from a Montana stock growers perspective, we've met with our delegation, we've talked to them, or we've recently sent a letter to them asking them to support those tax provisions. But for the general producer, a rancher out on the countryside, what are your recommendations on how they can best support your efforts in DC right now as we lead up to this Senate vote and then again the July 4th vote?
Well, I think the one thing I can stress is just talk to your delegation. I mean, you've got good people in Congress. You've got really good people in the House and the Senate. Just remind them that they're doing good things and that they're really working on behalf of producers. Senator Daines has done a really good job, especially on some of these Main Street issues. I know that we've got other allies too that are really speaking up. He's been very vocal as well. So we've got good allies. We just need to make sure that people outside of your delegation understand the significance of this. Is if they enjoy beef and they enjoy U.S. beef, then we're going to need to make sure that cattle producers in the United States are the ones that are going to thrive, and we're going to have the next generation and multiple generations that can do that. In order to continue to provide the safest, highest quality protein in the world that has flavor and quality that's unmatched anywhere else, we need a business climate that encourages that. This is not an industry for the faint of heart. This is not just something that anybody can pick up and do. This is a skill set. This is a knowledge set, and this is a multi-generational industry that relies on a good business environment. We rely on competition. We thrive in the free market, but we also need to make sure that it's not Uncle Sam that's setting us up for failure. And we need a tax code that promotes that entrepreneurial spirit, that promotes small businesses, promotes family businesses. And we feel like this tax package in this one big, beautiful bill can do exactly that.
I would say we also agree with that. And that is something we talk about, I would say, pretty regularly in any of our public comment and in speaking to our delegation too, is just that concept of like rural communities and how important those like affiliated businesses are to ranchers and to ranchers' success as well, and how we all work together. So glad to hear that that's the message that's being shared in DC as well. But kind of looking ahead, what do you see are some of the biggest policy battles we have heading our way beyond all this tax stuff?
Let's forecast that the one big beautiful bill passes.
Yes,
You have had quite a busy first couple quarters for 2025, but what does the next 6 to 12 months look like from a policy standpoint in your world?
Well, I think that the big thing about that is, with that one big beautiful bill, there's going to be a lot of regulatory things that are going to be needed to implement that. I think the administration is going to move quickly to try to secure a lot of those changes, to use that authority given to it by Congress to get that done. We still want to see some permanency on with relief from the Corporate Transparency Act, which was the issue that stole Christmas for me this last year. But that's something I would like to see addressed. When you look at trade, we're still way behind a lot of our competitors in securing market access into other countries. A lot of countries already have access in the U.S. We just want fair and reciprocal trade into those other markets. That's going to be a heavy lift, and we've got administration that'll do that. There's still a lot that needs to be resolved on the transportation side. There's still a lot that needs to be improved with shipping. There are things that we need to do. There's things that Congress needs to take action on to set the economy up to really keep performing at this high level. We're going to need to, if we're really going to focus on producer profitability, those are those big macro factors that we really need to focus on. Is making sure that we got the right business climate, and then we have the opportunities for people to excel, to compete. So we're not just competing with each other, but we're competing with other proteins, and we're competing with other producers from other countries. We don't have all that access right now. We need it. That is really what is going to set the next generation of cattle producers up to be successful, and to use all those advantages we have, and to continue to be the dominant beef producers in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Kent, for joining us today. We thought we were going to get through our 2 topics fairly quickly, and you have there's a lot to share and a lot to talk about, and unfortunately, it's a minute by minute changing too. So thank you so much for all the work that you have been doing on behalf of Montana producers as well as producers around the country, because it is sometimes a thankless job, and we really do appreciate, especially from that tax front, all the work and the leadership NCBA and you have done. I know that you kind of lead the tax Aggie group in Washington, D.C. and kind of coordinate that. So thanks again for all the work there that you have been doing.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I would just encourage people, the fight's not over yet. We got to make sure that we get this tax package across the line, and then make sure that we can get everybody set up to succeed. So that's what it's all about, and we just look forward to getting this through the Senate, get it through the House, and get it to the President here very soon.
Well, thank you so much, Kent, for joining us today. And to our listeners, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube. You can also follow the Montana Stock Growers Association on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you next week.